Japan, 1991. This is Naoko Takeuchi, 24 years old, currently working as a pharmacist with a side gig creating manga, her lifelong passion. Unfortunately, she's barely making more than minimum wage due to the economic crisis Japan was experiencing at that moment. Between 1989 and 1990, the stock market had fallen 43%, almost half of its value. This era would become known as the Lost Decade due to the economic problems that young people of the time like Naoko were experiencing and how it affected their lives and pushed them out of the labor market, essentially erasing them from the economy and workforce. And yet, even with all this context, Naoko is about to make what will surely be the most important decision of her life. Against everything her co-workers, family, and even her editors say, she's about to create a work that will not only make her a millionaire, allow her to meet her future husband, influence millions of people worldwide, break all kinds of barriers and taboos, popularize anime and manga around the world, become the reference point for girls' stories, immortalizing herself in the pantheon of great mangaka in a male-dominated industry, but also, and more importantly, achieve all this and more by telling a story that comes directly from her heart, and in the process, silence all her critics. And all this thanks to a little rabbit. Born on March 15, 1967, in Kofu, Japan, Naoko was a very independent child from an early age, and some would say even stubborn, characteristics she would carry into adulthood, and that would influence the course of her life. She grew up alongside her younger brother Shingo in an environment where manga was a fundamental part of her life from a very early age, not because of her parents, but because of her three cousins who lived next door, who introduced her to the world of manga. They introduced her to several works that would mark her and influence her as an artist, some of these manga being Aim for the Ace, Rose of Versailles, and works by mangaka like Machiko Satonaka and Yumiko Igarashi. She wasn't just a fan of manga, but also of media related to manga and anime. From a young age, she enjoyed classic manga works and anime like Space Battleship Yamato, and was also a fan of tokusatsu, specifically Super Sentai, the original Japanese version of Power Rangers, a series based on a team of teenagers who dress in different colors to face villains with superpowers and abilities specific to each one. I bet this will not get more important down the line. Additionally, Takeuchi shared with her father a taste for plastic models and miniatures, which led her to define herself as an otaku, despite the weight this label would carry at the time. Although she became a devoted fan of otaku culture, she never really planned to start telling stories through manga until her high school years, when one day, passing by a store, she spotted a how to draw anime cells kit in an anime shop. She felt curious and immediately bought it and used it to improve her technique little by little. At the same time, she also joined two clubs that would prove fundamental in her formation as an artist. The Manga Club, which would help her become familiar with the fundamentals of technique, and the Astronomy Club, a subject that would become fundamental in many of her works, especially in Sailor Moon, the story that would catapult her to worldwide fame, but we'll get to that. Around this time, Naoko managed to publish her first manga at age 18 while still in high school. The manga was a one-shot titled Yume Janai no Ne, It's Not a Dream. Though not a great economic success, it did serve to get her foot in the door of the industry by winning second place in a Nakayoshi magazine contest aimed at new talents. Later, in 1986, she published another work titled Love Call, which earned her the Nakayoshi New Mangaka Award, establishing her as a young promise. However, Takeuchi reached that time that, hopefully, we all eventually reach. She was about to graduate from high school and had to choose between her manga passion or following the more traditional path and pursuing a university career. She chose the latter, partly due to pressure from her parents, who, although they didn't exactly look down on her making manga, didn't see it as a secure path to economic success. Besides, we're talking about the booming 80s, the Japanese economic miracle. Japan was experiencing economic growth never before seen in history. They had managed to move from a stage of devastation and loss of more than half their territory as a consequence of World War II to becoming the second largest economic power in the world, facing off against the almighty USA. Some debated that perhaps Japan had already surpassed the USA as the dominant economic power. Japan even earned the title of the Roaring Tiger of Asia. Therefore, a university career didn't sound so bad, as it promised the possibility of economic security due to the high demand for white-collar jobs due to the economic miracle. Plus, she had an affinity for science, so she chose that path, but never completely abandoned the world of manga. During her university years, Takeuchi balanced her studies with manga creation, occasionally sending some manga to publishers, managing to publish several of them, but they were all either one-shots or short works, nothing she could build a career on until 1991 with the work that would start it all. After graduation at the age of 23, she would publish a one-shot manga in Kodansha's quarterly magazine Run Run called Codename Sailor V, which follows Minako Aino, a teenager who goes from being a common student to a heroine with magical powers. With the guidance of Artemis, her companion companion and mentor cat, Minako becomes Sailor Fee, fighting against evil forces to protect Earth. The story is full of romance and comedy, something normal in manga stories for girls, but what made this story particular was its inspiration, Super Sentai. Its structure, transformation, and action elements make its influence from this genre very noticeable. Now, it's true that series like Cutie Honey by Go Nagai, the same creator of Devilman and Mazinger Z, also possess many of these characteristics and actually do things like age changes or costume changes that would go on to inspire Sailor Moon. But the difference with works like Cutie Honey is that Cutie Honey was shonen, meaning for boys, and Sailor V was shoujo, meaning for girls. I know it sounds a bit ridiculous today, but at the time it was revolutionary. Back then, the vast majority of stories for girls tended to be school or aristocratic romances that relied heavily on interpersonal drama, somewhat similar to a soap opera in many aspects. Sure, there were some that strayed a bit from these themes, like Attack No. 1, which moves away from these stories and is more similar to a traditional sports and self-improvement story. But first, we shouldn't be too reductionist, but they weren't the norm. And second, even in these stories, what still dominates is interpersonal drama. There wasn't much fantasy, adventure, or action, which becomes more noticeable when compared with other stories made for boys of the time, where just in Shonen Jump, the magazine where great works like Dragon Ball, Demon Slayer, Naruto, or One Piece have been published, we can see everything from romances, silly comedies, through sports and mysteries, all the way to action stories and fantasy or science fiction. What I'm getting at is that back then, the range of stories a girl could access through manga was somewhat limited. To make the comparison, if at that time, shoujo was like the traditional vanilla Barbie of all time, Sailor V was more like Bratz or Winx, taking what worked from the original Barbie idea and giving it a 180-degree turn by adding a more modern and youthful touch, taking you and your group of friends to explore other fashion styles or fantasy worlds where you could be whatever you wanted to be, not because someone gives it to you, but because you worked hard and earned it with your effort. Again, I don't want to oversimplify things and act like there weren't great stories with merit at that time trying new things, but Sailor Fi was a very fresh breath of air to the genre, and the girls of the time seemed to think the same, as it was very well received within the magazine, and this success would not go unnoticed by the anime industry. In 1991, Toei Animation, then known as Toei Doga, the animation studio behind works like Dragon Ball, Saint Seiya, and One Piece, among many others, was searching for a new project to replace the animated adaptation of the manga Goldfish Warning that was being published in Nakayoshi magazine. It was then that producer Iria Azuma discovered Codename Sailor V, the one-shot that Takeuchi had published in Run Run magazine. Seeing the potential in the story, Azuma didn't hesitate to contact Fumio Osano, Takeuchi's editor, to express Toei's interest in adapting the manga into an anime format. This proposal would not only change the fate of Codename Sailor V, which would go from being a quarterly publication in Run Run to a monthly one in Nakayoshi, but would also inspire Takeuchi to take a more ambitious step. When Osano communicated this news to Takeuchi, the mangaka saw an opportunity to expand her creative vision. Instead of simply transferring Sailor Fee to anime, Takeuchi proposed a more ambitious idea. She would maintain Codename Sailor V in Run Run magazine while developing a new series in the same universe for the monthly Nakayoshi magazine. This new series would be called Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon, or Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon, depending on the translation. Rather than limiting herself to a direct adaptation, the mangaka proposed a parallel project. While continuing to publish Sailor V and Run Run, she would create a new series for the monthly Nakayoshi magazine. This new work, which would eventually be known as Sailor Moon, would expand the original concept by presenting a team of 5 warriors. Takeuchi's proposal transformed the concept of a lone heroine into a team of 5 warriors. The idea emerged from her love for Super Sentai series, where instead of series like Kamen Rider with just a lone warrior, it focuses more on a group of friends with superpowers, like in Himitsu Sentai Goranger, one of the Super Sentai shows she had enjoyed in her youth. Sailor V, far from being discarded, would be integrated as part of this team of heroines, initially functioning as a mysterious warrior of the lone wolf type, to later become more of a mentor and eventually become one more of the group, thus enriching the universe that Naoko had created. But before continuing with this story, we need to go back a bit to the past for some context, and to make what follows make more sense. Sailor Moon belongs to the shoujo demographic, meaning girls, which is often confused with the literary genre, which is actually mahou shoujo, or magical girl. The first refers to the audience the story is aimed at, and the second is what the story is about. Currently, when we think of a mahou shoujo, or magical girl, we think of a story about a protagonist, and almost always a group of friends fighting evil creatures with their magical powers. The curious thing about this is that this wasn't always the case, and in fact, it was Sailor Moon that popularized this story cliche, because before before Sailor Moon, the magical girls genre was very different. This genre originally was born due to influences from American series like Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Bewitched, specifically because of the animation that served as the opening for Bewitched, which Japanese girls of the time loved. These stories showed women with magical powers dealing with everyday situations, and for a long time, the genre would basically be just that. In 1966, inspired by this trend, Sally the Witch appeared, which told the story of how a young witch must adapt to the human world. This was the first magical girl story. It's worth clarifying that at the time, the series didn't belong to this genre because it didn't exist yet. This work marked the beginning of the genre in Japan, standing out for its focus on the everyday and on magic as an element that enriched daily life. During the 70s, the genre began to consolidate with series like Princess Knight by Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Blackjack and Astro Boy, and Cutie Honey by Go Nagai, which although weren't entirely mahou shoujo since again, the genre didn't exist and they were made for a more masculine audience, introduced concepts like the idea of a young woman with a double identity, a sense of justice, transformations, the fantasy of becoming an adult, etc. Works like Majoko Megu-chan by the same Go Nagai began to explore more complex stories, with rivalries and conflicts that reflected themes of maturity, integrating a touch of drama and emotion, and was the first to use mahou shoujo as a term to define the work. In the 80s, the genre evolved towards what would become its most iconic characteristic, the transformation. They weren't the first to use it, but they were the ones who popularized it. Series like Magical Princess Minky Momo and Creamy Mummy presented normal girls, or at least tried to sell the idea that they were normal girls who acquired powers and transformed into adult and elegant magical girls who used their new abilities to fight against evil. They became the reference in the genre and the series that everyone would copy due to their great success. Now, it might seem that they are the same as Sailor Moon, with all that about normal girls, transformations, and powers to fight evil, but there were still two big differences. The first is that they were still just one superheroine instead of several, and the second is that while they did fight against evil, they did it more with rainbows and feelings than with kicks and laser beams. They were more like Saturday morning cartoons when compared with what the genre would become, if that makes sense. Therefore, Sailor Moon was very transgressive at the time, as it was a complete turn for the genre. Some even consider it a deconstruction of the genre, as characters could die, bleed, have traumas, and get their hands dirty when fighting. There were people who didn't quite like all of this, and even more surprisingly, if you didn't know or haven't noticed, all these stories and the dozens of others I haven't named, as strange as it may seem for a genre targeted at girls, were made by men. Not a single one. Not Sally, not Cutie Honey, not Milky Momo, not even Bewitched or Sabrina, the works that generated this boom, were created by a woman. Sailor Moon, in the almost 30 years that the genre had existed until that point, was the first magical girls anime made by a woman. You probably already know where this story is going. Every idea Naoko had was either rejected or met with disapproval. When Takeuchi proposed creating a group of warrior girls inspired by Team Hero series like Super Sentai, her idea clashed with the expectations of her editors at Nakayoshi and Toei Animation. They weren't convinced it would work without the traditional comic stereotypes like the nerdy character or the overweight one. Takeuchi wanted her heroines to be all beautiful and unique, representing strength and femininity, as she considered herself a strong and independent woman and wanted to see that reflected in her work and create something that could inspire girls. When defining the designs and colors of her characters, she also encountered resistance. For example, when she wanted the protagonist Usagi, or Rabbit in some English translations, to have silver hair, the editors insisted that color was too dull and unattractive. In the end, after arguing, both Takeuchi and her editors settled on blonde hair. But even this didn't quite please her editors, with one famously saying, "Well, at least she doesn't look like a granny." In addition to seeking to reflect themes of female empowerment, Naoko also wanted to present relationships between her female characters that were deep, even romantically ambiguous. When Sailor Moon premiered in 1992, it quickly became an overwhelming success. Both the manga and anime captivated a huge audience, standing out as an innovative series that went beyond what was normally seen in the magical girl genre. The narrative that mixed teenagers' daily lives with heroic battles and magical powers captured an entire generation. The series' success also lay in its message of female empowerment. Takeuchi created characters who were strong, independent, and complex, showing women capable of being warriors, leaders, and loyal friends at the same time. Additionally, the series incorporated themes and relationships uncommon in anime of its time, which especially resonated with young audiences and offered a more diverse and realistic representation of female friendships and love. This unique mixture of action, romance, and empowerment quickly elevated the series to great status, and to this day it has become the greatest reference in the genre, selling almost 50 million copies and having been broadcast in almost every country in the world. Sailor Moon didn't just impact Japan, its popularity expanded internationally. Before the advent of streaming, it was the anime translated into the most languages in the world. Because of this, it gained followers worldwide, popularizing anime globally. Although some of her ideas were questioned, especially for international adaptations where certain themes were toned down, Naoko fought to maintain her original vision, proving her great determination and talent, and in the end, she succeeded both artistically and financially, becoming a multi-millionaire thanks to that.